Episode 5 of Turn A Gundam is an absolute masterclass in storyboarding. Tomino is in the chair once again after having taken a break in episode 4, and I had mentioned how the storyboarding was kind of different in episode 4, that it had a different feel to it, that I didn't necessarily consider to be worse or anything. It just didn't have the same kind of sense of flow. And the first 3 episodes really were compressing a whole lot of information into everything that was going on. It was setting up all the characters. It was getting this whole entire complicated struggle developed. But now the ball is rolling. I said at the end of the last episode that it kind of felt like the prologue was over, and now we are on equal footing and we can just watch action happen. And that's exactly what we get in episode 5. And this is where it almost feels like showing off on the storyboarding front, because much of the episode is just a couple of lengthy action sequences that would be incredibly difficult to pull off in animation if you didn't have someone like Tomino, who is so incredibly experienced at realizing this type of thing, at the helm. I think when you watch something like this done successfully, it's easy to underestimate how much effort goes into that, how much thought would have had to go into realizing that, because it is meant to feel effortless. It's meant to be something you can take for granted. It's just, oh yeah, that's happening. This is the way the story goes, so of course that's what I'm seeing visually. But when you are really thinking about the fact that none of this happened, this is just a bunch of drawings that somebody's doing. And then you think about how few times something like this has been done well, how many times something like this has been done poorly, how even in relatively understated scenes like this, where you're not seeing the flashiest animation, you're not seeing the craziest, most ridiculous idea of a scenario. A significant amount of this episode is dedicated to a very old school kind of action scene where Loran is descending out of an airship by ladder to land on a plane. And the way that this is communicated visually, there's not much that could have been done to make Loran look like he is effectively falling off of a plane onto another plane or whatever. But the way that this whole scene is staged, the way that the objects are arranged, the camera angles that we see everything from, is able not only to communicate the scene perfectly, but also to contextualize it within a larger framework of the airship has just flown over a space where a battle is about to begin. And Sochier's plane is heading towards that battle, but also using the airship that is heading in a different direction as kind of a shield. So basically, the distance between objects is extremely important to keep track of in order to understand the action throughout this episode. And so a lot of time is dedicated to making sure that it is super, super, super clear where everything is relative to everything else all the time. For me, this one factor is like what essentially separates memorable anime action from unmemorable anime action. There is tons of anime that just has a bunch of flashy lights and guys jumping around and the camera's moving all over the place and everything looks crazy. And then after it's all said and done, all I really remember is that there was action, not like specifically what just happened. And so all of my favorite action animations are ones where I can remember the entire sequence. Something like Into the Spider-Verse with the whole train sequence at the end of that movie. Like, that is a visual splendor. But also being in 3D gives them a little bit of a cheat code in terms of maintaining spatial relationships in a way that in 2D animation, you have to fake it every single image. You can't have two objects that just maintain their positioning and then you move the camera. You have to literally decide how everything works in the frame every single time you change the shot. And typically, again, this is decided at the storyboarding phase, when you're literally sketching out what the shot is going to look like when it's completed. Because a complete composite shot of animation is actually a background illustration, a cell of animation, and then those cells have to be drawn in sequence one after another in a way that maintains shape and communicates movement. So there's a lot going on in making animation look good, but there is so much you can do just at the storyboarding level, and this show is very dependent on that. And it's not that it's not also gorgeous. It is also gorgeous in the sense that as a TV anime from the year 2000, this is like at the highest level of drawing skill. Of if you're looking for something that's 50 episodes long and came out that year, this is one of the best looking shows in terms of just raw drawing skill. But it is not a film. If you want to see Gundam and how good Gundam could look at this time, you could watch any of the OVAs or the older movies, the movies from the late 80s and early 90s, right before the Japanese economic bubble burst, are the best looking anime films. So if you want to watch F91, you can see what this truly could look like. In terms of what could a TV anime get away with the fewest number of drawings to still make sense and still look impressive and still communicate everything you want. When people compare this to a Ghibli film, that vibe is not just because of the airplanes, it's not just because of the color palette, because there's plenty of anime that have tried to capture that feel. It's the fact that Yoshiyuki Tomino is as good of a storyboard artist as Hayao Miyazaki is. That's what makes this show feel like a Ghibli film, is that Miyazaki's specialty is how well he maintains spatial relationships between characters. And you can watch my old video about that, how Hayao Miyazaki maps a setting. I think I even mentioned it in one of these videos already, but people keep comparing this show to Future Boy Conan in the comments, and I'm like, you can't get a more clear example of why these two shows feel similar than looking at the way they're storyboarded, looking at how the action is structured. I'm going to get even deeper into this, but first I want to go over the comments and shout out to my channel members. I'm up to making $12.40 a month on memberships, which is very exciting. The more that number goes up, the easier this gets to do. And I'm going to stick all the way through Turn A Gundam unquestionably, but if that number is, say, at like 150 by the time this show is done, I will definitely be moving on to another anime and keeping this going. It takes about 1 day of work, like about an 8-hour work day to make one of these in total. Like all of the work combined is about 8 hours of work. So anyway, shouts out to everybody getting me on the way there. We've got Drema, Night, Kino, Forte, Green, Duncan264, Naomix, Never Knows Best, and Crystalline Fos. A lot of y'all are also members on the Trixie the Golden Witch channel, so thank you so much for being incredibly supportive towards all of this. Going over some of the comments from episode 3, Beetlehorn said, I didn't comment last episode, so I'm leaving too. Without going into spoilers, I think Sochie is almost a protagonist or deuteragonist of Turn A. Laurent in the coming-of-age ceremony finishes his stigmata, but Sochie never does. She's the character who never gets to her coming-of-age, and a lot of her growth and arc is about immaturity. Turn A is really her coming-of-age tale. Laurent very quickly came into his own after his coming-of-age ceremony. I like that idea, that it's a coming-of-age story, but where the hero is like, what if you came of age immediately and you were like super mature, and then you've got this other character who is like the last to click into place. I talked a little bit about Brain Powered last time, how Mercury Falcon had described it to me as a very nihilistic show, and Spirit Chaser said Brain Powered is more so like a stepping stone towards Turn A Gundam. At its core, it explores the dysfunctional family and is also partly an endearing expression of love. It's not fair to call it nihilistic when it's nowhere near as dark as previous Tomino Gundam anime such as Zeta and Victory. It can be very hopeful and optimistic, which, I haven't seen it, so I'm getting more curious about Brain Powered. This isn't even the only comment about it, and now I'm kind of wanting to check it out. PS3 Wizard 45 said, finally us poor Hiki Neats can watch. I don't have money, so take my algorithm engagement comment instead. Hey, anything you can do to help, especially sharing these videos with anybody that might be curious about them, would be a huge, huge help. Person Online 123 said, not sure if it's been said yet, but I am enjoying the fashion in this show. Especially Fran, Miche, Joseph, and occasionally when we see the jumpers that Laurent and Soshi wear before battle. Diana sometimes serves and sometimes flops, and Kihel pulls off some fun hats later on. Oh, and we must not forget that for some odd reason, the Moon people wear uniforms that frame their groin area almost like it's mirroring that part of the Gundam. Yeah, this show does have some amazing outfits. I agree, Fran Doll is always killing it. I love pretty much everything Kihel has been seen wearing has been super interesting. Harry Ord is David Bowie aura level. Miche's suspenders with the yellow and green is like one of my favorites. I think we see that in this episode. And her pilot suit. Just the way that she uses yellow and green all throughout her wardrobe is really, really cool. And the white and blue with Kihel is really cool too. Yeah, it's possible that at the end of this show, maybe I'll go back through and do a rundown on all the outfits. I've been saying I was going to do that for a few shows for a long time, but it is still an idea I'd like to give a shot. Again, Ironicus said, I really enjoy Brain Powered, both for its own sake and for how you can see many key figures who are about to make Turn A Gundam together, building the collaboration that would make this show possible. The two of them and Overman King Geiner are really interesting as a triptych of Tomino banging the same drums he has for 30 years, but to new results with new collaborators, the transition to digital processes, and the perspectives and experience of age. Unfortunately, Geiner lacks Romy Park, which I assume means that Brain Powered has Romy Park, and that makes me even more curious to give it a shot, because I love Romy Park so much, which I think I mentioned in episode 4. In a comment on episode 2, Century Color Million Color said, from trying to deduce the location for a few years, your guess was really good with Boston. If Will Games' estate is in Albany, Gnosis is either New York or Boston. I'm pretty sure I read some behind the scenes that it was New York. My guess is that vicinity is either around Massachusetts, New Hampshire, or Vermont. I also think the Lost Mountains are the Green Mountains. Yeah, so I would think that probably vicinity and Gnosis would be in the same state because it seems like they're less than like a few hours away at the most. Like it never seems to take like a whole day to get from one to the other, even with the relatively slow cars of the era. So I don't know. I mean, I guess those states are pretty close together. If you're in like New Hampshire, Vermont, it's like not very hard to get from one to the other, even if you're in a major city. But yeah, New York would be a solid bet. Like I'm wondering, maybe upstate New York, if Albany would make sense because that would be up near the mountains. Your idea that the Lost Mountains are the Green Mountains, that would make sense. There's also like the Adirondacks over there. Upstate New York, that feels like a strong bet. It's definitely not New York City because it's not like, an island. Century Color Million Color continues. In response to the part where I was really curious about this conversation that Keith and Laurent have, where I was a little unclear on their dialogue and if it was translated correctly, and they said, I believe the dialogue is Keith saying, why do Earth people always look at what's above them but never look at what's below? And Laurent is saying, because they can't get off the ground. And that Laurent is trying to get at that Earthers are so busy industrializing, looking to the next best thing, that they don't even realize how important what they have, the Earth, is. And that I don't think it's anti-industrialization so much as a point that people get too caught up in what's new. I definitely think this interpretation sounds more correct than whatever the translation I read was that was confusing to me at the time. They continue, I'm also curious that you didn't bring up Lord Reinford, Gween's dad, at the parade, though I think the writers forgot about him too as he becomes irrelevant, and then he says some spoilers. But yeah, I think I just didn't realize that's who that was, because they had mentioned, the idea of Lord Reinford being there. I just didn't put it together in my brain. All right, everybody else who commented was mostly just being nice, and I thank you very much for that. I will respond to all of those comments for the good old algorithmic boosting and just to show the love and spread it around. But let's go ahead and start talking about this actual episode. This one's a lot more straightforward, so even though I've rambled for so long, it might still not be the longest episode of this podcast. So episode 5 starts off with the militia storming its way over the fields, heading towards the little encampment that was established in the last episode that the Moon people are set up at. They've got some old school tanks, some between World War I and II level like tanks going out there. And as this battalion is moving over the field, we also see that the airship is passing overhead, and Kihel is watching what's happening down below from the airship window, and her mom is sleeping next to her. So down below, the scraggly beard commander guy is saying that it's real ballsy of the Moonanites to have put up fences on someone else's land. And I think that's a funny thing to say because, yeah, if someone did something that ballsy, I wouldn't mess with them. I'd be like, yeah, they seem real confident that they could just have this. It's really funny how willing the Earth people are to just die over conceptually protecting their land when realistically they will just all die, like King Leonidas and the 300. But there's not a slowing down that they're making possible. They're just throwing their lives away for really no reason. So anyway, they're like, what's going on with Miche and Sochie? It's time to go. Loran is up in the airship also, and he's watching a great American bald motherfucking eagle flying under the wing of the airship for a moment just because, America is cool. And he's remembering Gween, who told him that the mechanical doll is a crucial militia asset and that even when negotiating, one must have the strength to be on equal footing. So I don't know, how that could be. He's basically telling Loran, hey, you have to get so good at piloting this robot that you single-handedly are better than their whole team. You have to even the scales for me, because otherwise, how can we negotiate? It's like, bro, you can't negotiate. And so Loran's wondering, do you really need to show a force just to negotiate? Obviously, no. There must be a better answer. None of this is a good idea. So then the rudder of the plane shifts, and Kihel asks what's happening as the captain comes into the cabin and announces that they're changing course and that their arrival in vicinity is going to be slightly delayed. And Loran's questioning this, and he says a battle is developing below. So Loran and Kihel are looking out the window, scanning the ground, looking for the action, and Kihel spots Miche and Sochie flying in close by. So then hearing the name Sochie causes her mother to go, hip heavy desu wa. Literally, it's a hip heavy, which is just a really funny sentence, because desu wa is a proper lady method of speaking. So just hearing the sentence hip heavy desu wa, it'll never happen anywhere but here. So as the hip heavy is flying around the ship, Kihel is wondering if they plan to attack the moon encampment, which they had just flown over. And Loran and Kihel are trying to puzzle out why Sochie is flying and has Miche in tow, and why they are alone in the sky. And meanwhile, Kihel's mom is like, are we back in vicinity? And she's just, she's losing her mind. I think this was established in the last episode, but it's really hammered home in this one. So then Loran's hanging out the window, shouting at the girls that fighting in an airplane like this will not do them any good. And Kihel's like, what are you doing? She's pissed off. And then he's like, look, these girls are hiding behind the airship to use it as a shield so that they can get in close and not be detected on radar. They're blending their radar blips, basically, which is clever, but it means that they're up to something. And so now they're curious about it. And meanwhile, Kihel's mom is waking up, and Loran's trying to coordinate with the girls, by yelling at them. So Kihel's, trying to seat her mother down, and it's become clear at this point her mom has totally dissociated from the situation. She's going into dementia. She has no idea what's happening, and she's never going to again. Loran has this really excellent grave tone in the voice as he instructs Kihel to keep after her mother, and he's banging on the door of the pilot cabin and telling them, open the door for me, I'm going outside. And the captain's like, we're in the air. And Loran's like, it's not suicide. I'm a militia pilot. And that plane is there to pick me up, which is fucking hilarious. Obviously a lie. What situation ever, would a biplane have to intersect I guess because he is it's the kind of thing you can say to the pilot, and it makes enough sense for him to think, okay, that's reasonable, but it's not reasonable. So anyway, the pilot opens the door and they lower a ladder, a rope ladder out. And Michelle's like, I cannot believe he's doing this. But nonetheless, she's like, all right, well, Sochie, get in close and slow. So Laurent starts trying to do it, and he's immediately like, this isn't actually going to work. And then he slips, and he catches the ladder on his way down. So already the situation is fraught and not, it's uncomfortable. It's not going as well as he thought it would. Sochie then overshoots trying to rescue him and then overdoes going back on her throttle to slow down, and the propeller gets too slow, and Sochie is like, how are you going to get that started again if that stops? So then she has to pull up and reset her tempo, and the captain's like, oh wow, the climb rate on that plane, and Laurent's like, yeah, that's my plane, which is like, I don't know, maybe that's true, but it's not in this situation for sure. He just wants to make sure that guy knows. So Laurent can't see anything below him as the girls come in steady for the rescue, and Kihel is just passively reassuring her mom, interrupting her insistence that they get back to the housework. Laurent is free-falling from the airship to the plane in another Macross-like romantic moment, which is once again hilariously capstoned by him crushing his balls. Really goes to show why Eureka 7 had to push everything to like the top degree to romanticize this imagery over again. Like, it really is like something that would happen in Macross, and not that Macross isn't also funny and would also do this kind of gag, but usually Macross was playing moments like this more straight, and other anime, including sequels of Macross and other Gundam shows, had copied that stuff enough that I definitely think this is an intentional making fun of like the romanticization of people falling from one, ship to another, and how like, yeah, most likely you're just going to get hurt. But they try to keep it funny and still be able to have that stuff, they're not trying to be like, oh, everything must be realistic all the time. It's just like, wouldn't it be funny though if he's always hitting his nuts right at the end? And then both of the girls literally add insult to injury, criticizing Laurent for jumping, and he's like, begging them, think about how it feels to be a guy. And he's like, we got to go back to the manor. And then Sochie is like, where's mom and my sister? And he's like, they're on the airship, which, you maybe should have thought about before you got involved in this whole situation. Like, not only is there just people in there and you don't even know who they are, but it's actually people relevant to you too. Then he asks Michelle if she got her father's permission for this flight, and she says that she doesn't need it. So then he just is like, okay, what are you doing? And then Sochie does what she does best, which is to totally neglect the premise of what he's asking and ask her own question, just saying, do you want Earth to get taken over? And Laurent's like, that's not what the moon race is doing, which is overplaying his hand because he's not supposed to know anything about them. He's like, they just want a place to live in peace. And Sochie is like, how do you know that? And he says, oh, I overheard them when they held me prisoner. And then Sochie is just like, all right, you know what? Let's her real feelings out. Look, if they hadn't come to Earth, my dad would still be alive. Now, I want you to remember, while that is true, it's also Gween's fault. He's the one who misnegotiated all this and established a whole attack. So then Laurent says that's true, but, he doesn't realize that he could be putting up a better argument probably. And then she says they're planning to kill us all with their mechanical dolls, which she says, and then she's like flying emotionally, and Laurent's like, please don't bank so sharply. And then she's like, well, I can't see past your ass. Get it out of the way. And so Kihel's watching the plane head off, and she's just worried about Sochie, and her mom's like, is someone having a festival? There's so many fireworks going on, because there's bombs, in the sky. And so, yeah, the attack's happening. So then Michelle goggles up, and she's like, Sergeant Yanni and his team are in, and so it's time for us to go. So I want to talk about just the way that this has been paced, this whole scene leading up to now. We're almost at like the halfway point in the episode, and the entire thing has basically been in real time. Like, for almost 10 minutes, we've just been experiencing 10 minutes with no cuts forward, which has been really rare for this show. There's been a few scenes or a few moments that were closer to real time, but usually it's really jumping around quite a bit. There's an effect here that I'm going to dub the pacing Doppler effect, because basically the way that the scenes play out in this episode is that you'll have two characters who are in one place and two characters who are in another place. And both of their scenes are happening simultaneously, but they are close enough to being the same place that we see both scenes, interacting or crossing over with one another. And there's this effect where, we're cutting from Sochie and Miche in the plane, and then Laurent and Kihel in the airship, and we've kind of established these very well as two separate scenes, and then those two scenes start interacting until a point where they finally cross over. Laurent leaves one scene and enters the other, and then those two scenes go farther apart from one another again. Kihel and her mom are now on the airship alone. Laurent is now with Sochie and Miche on the airplane, and then the airship is left behind. It doesn't have anything left to do in this scene, so the airplane heads off into the battle. And we already knew the battle was there because it had been established earlier at points when it was close to each plane. Basically, whenever someone was nearby to the battle, we saw the battle down there, but if we're not nearby to it, then it's not really being shown. And this is what I mean by the pacing Doppler effect, that there's this sense of we're trying to keep things relatively close together so that we have this sense of immediacy within the scene. We're not losing track of time. We understand that all of this is happening one after another, even though we're leaving locations and coming back to them. Because we know how far apart all that stuff is, it all feels like one scene. If it wasn't for the fact that right after seeing Sergeant Yanni down on the ground level, we literally panned the camera up to see Kihel looking down at them, we would not have understood when we cut to Kihel that she was directly over top of what was going on below. But because we see that and we know that she's heading in the opposite direction from them, we have a sense that she must have gotten at least like a few hundred yards away when a minute later we're told that the battle is starting, because we know that the airship was heading in the opposite direction. We know it passed over the battle, but we also know that it's close enough that this would be relevant to the fact that they're in the sky and they don't need to be in the sky when a battle is happening. It's safer on the ground, assumably. But then when Sochie's plane is like hiding behind them, then we have this sense of, okay, they're heading toward the battle, and so we join them on that path, and we end up subverting the path we'd been taking with the airship before. It's just so brilliantly laid out. You can see it all in your mind's eye as it's playing out. You can keep track of where everything is when you're not looking at it, because it all makes sense relative to each other, and it just keeps the scene feeling so immediate and exciting in a way that is just kind of rare for TV anime. So anyways, as Laurent's protesting that this attack's not going to work and the tanks are rolling in, they're passing some kind of preposterous, massive steamroller thing in the distance. It's hard to tell what it is, but you know it's over there, and that's important. And then Yanni is telling them that they got to keep up with the Air Force and finish off the mechanical dolls, which is a dangerous goal for people who don't realize maybe that their own pilots are going to steal one of those dolls, or maybe they do realize that. I wouldn't attack the mechanical dolls if I knew my friends are about to take one, or if I knew my equipment was far worse. But then Yanni seems to see the girls heading towards the steamroller, and the rest of the Hip Heavy squad is bombing and firing on the moon base just randomly. Tanks and trucks are not far behind them, and Yanni is shouting to send these aliens back where they came from, like he's an ICE member. And then they raid the buildings, and they're driving people out, and they're stealing their equipment, and they're just like roughing up women for no reason. This woman's like pleading that there's children here, and he's like, do you want to get hurt, Just like, these guys are being real dickheads. They are just not good people. The militia's like, anything you can take it, no matter how small. We'll have the eggheads look at it, and we see what very clearly appears to be a microwave being loaded into the truck. Laurent is wondering what Miche's trying to do as she gets up from her seat, stating that they will never figure out the technology just from destroying the dolls, and so she's going to take one on. And then they close in on the mech, which is apparently just shitting out segments of fence. I guess it's a base building multi-purpose robot, and Miche jumps onto it and tries to put the windshield out with a hammer. instantly revealing herself to be tremendously out of her depth in handling this technology. And she just keeps banging on the not glass. So another hip heavy gets shot down as the Wadom and the Wad fleet are emerging onto the scene finally. And Ensign Poe is outraged. She's like, why can't we just wipe these people out for staging this attack? And she notices the hip heavy is trying to break into a civilian mobile rib, as they're called. So she tells the Wads to crush the cannon fodder while she goes to stop that. And Loran quickly identifies that the Wadom is heading their way, and he alerts Sochie, pulling on her face to keep her from launching an attack on it because that robot could instantly kill them if it wanted to. Poe is so sick of this shit that she steps out of her mecha to accost Miche personally, declaring how depressing it is to have to fight savages like them, that she feels bad even killing them as they aren't real opponents. She lifts Miche between the mecha's fingers, telling her that squishing her would just make her Wadom dirty, and instead she's going to use her as a hostage. Sochie calls out to Miche, but Loran continues insisting that they return to vicinity and reminding her that they can mobilize the white doll, and this would be the only way to successfully rescue Miche, which is convincing. So then this is the first time we finally full cut out of the location somewhere else. To Gnosis, the castle, it's in broad daylight, and there isn't any smoke in the distance for once. Harry Ord is here in a chair, and a no-name officer is whispering in his ear that apparently there have been several civilian casualties, meaning that the militia fired on unarmed people. Gwyn is receiving the same information, and he says that he told Colonel Michael not to do anything beyond threatening them and to double-check this information, which is just stubborn doubt for no reason other than that he's committed to the narrative that he has in his head of the moment that is already unfolding, even though that moment has already passed and shifted. He's neglecting his accelerationist tendencies because he feels overwhelmed by how things are proceeding. So then Gwyn puts on his most arrogant face and he says that they want Diana Counter to void the last 2 years of negotiation. And Harry just goes way past his premise and is like, did you ever even recognize us as human beings whatsoever? And the phrasing he uses is not moon race. He says denizens of the moon, the full phrase in Japanese. And then Gwyn responds and really leans in on moon race when he responds in English. So he's kind of almost using moon race as like a disparaging term, even though there are people in the moon race who refer to themselves that way. So Gwyn says that their learning and knowledge wasn't on par with the moon race, and so Harry is like, well, are you saying we should have behaved on the same level of barbarism that you do? And Gwyn is just like, yeah. So Harry just like gets up like, okay, whatever, dude. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Kehel's mom is babbling incoherently about household chores as she is guided to the rubble of their home where Sam and Jessica wait. And Kehel's mom asks Jessica if she doesn't feel sorry for whoever lives in this burnt down house. And Jessica's just like breaking into tears because, yeah, she does. And then, meanwhile, nearby, the airship has landed, and in one of Gwyn's fancy cars, peeling around the landed airship, with Joseph at the wheel, Sid in the passenger seat, and Loran and Sochie riding in the back. And we know that the airship must be landed nearby, and that the car would therefore be relatively nearby to what we just saw, but it's actually leaving the scene. Like, your instinct from a film perspective is to think that they are on their way to the same place as what we just saw because we had just cut to that scene. But actually, we're leaving that scene in a really clever way that keeps the action moving without being disorienting or feeling like that came out of nowhere. Loran asks Sid if they found any weapons that the white doll can use, and Sid says that all they have found is the other round mechanical dolls. Joseph points out that the size of the hands of these robots is different, so they wouldn't be able to trade weapons, but also that he believes that the white doll's weapons should be buried around there. And Sid says that the ball robots are being cleaned up, and since the militia is being mobilized, they will probably find weapons soon. Sochie the whole time is just acting too proud for all of it because her plan was pretty much humbled out of existence. Loran points out that someone will have to maintenance all of these mechanical dolls, and then they arrive at the white doll, which Joseph says looks a lot smaller laying on its back like this. Sid asks if Laurent's really going in without a weapon, and Laurent says that since they have Miche, he has to rescue her with whatever he's got. Saucier asks him about the manual for the thing, and Laurent points out that there are apparently some kind of weapons inside of the chest area. It's interesting that he points this out because it feels like foreshadowing, but it actually doesn't pay off. He does not use them in this episode. And I think that is clever because it gives you this constant sense of, is he going to use the chest weapon? And the fact that he doesn't just leaves you more curious about it. She's asking him about how you press on the pad thing, and he's just like, I don't even know. So it's clearly some kind of new type instinct that he's using to read the thing. Saucier demonstrates to the others that it's not a book, although it does seem to have a page in the middle so that it could display 4 screens at a time, which is interesting. And Sid says that the Dark History had called these electrical books. Saucier demands that Laurent hurry and learn how to read the ebook, and he starts getting sick of her shit, just being like, look, I can't do everything at once. And then we get the eye catch. At the manor, Sam is entertaining the madam's request to tend to the windows as Kihel carries tea, and her mother is looking at an old broken photo of herself and her husband, and Sam is wiring the door shut. I assume this is just so that Kihel's mom won't try to, just release herself randomly, because otherwise there's no payoff to this. Kihel's mom tells her that she needs a new frame for the photo to hang it up, and Kihel has this real raw look as she's agreeing and closing the door behind her. Her mother complains that father makes a fuss if she doesn't keep up at the house, and Kihel is visibly shaken and unable to protest, and she finally breaks down at the sink in front of a mirror in the hallway by a huge bay window where the sun is rising. Yes, I knew that the emotional other foot had to drop eventually, but yeah, she's been really going through it. Opening up the window, she sees a hip-heavy taking off, being followed by the white doll, and laments that Saucier is becoming a soldier. On the knee of the Wadom, Ensign Poe is being told that her armored hatch is in bad shape, and she responds, well, it's your job to fix it. And the mechanic says that they'll have to bring it back to base, and meanwhile down below, the ponytail guy is grilling Miche to admit that Gwyn had told them to attack. She keeps insisting that she acted on her own to try to drive them out, and she calls him a windbag. She also says that tying her up is basically admitting that they plan to invade, which, no. And then incredulous Ponytail just tells her that, a unit is not supposed to mobilize on its own. And she's like, if you don't like it, then hang me and put me to a firing squad. And he's like, you're a barbarian. There's no way we'd hang a child as young as you. Although they do send middle schoolers on spy missions to unfamiliar planets, but whatever. And then he tells her that she can't provoke him and that she's tied up because she behaves like a wild animal. And then he cuts the ropes with a dagger, but he leaves her under supervision of his men as he comes out to notice that the white doll is arriving onto the scene and demanding the retrieval of the hostage. Laurent argues out of, a megaphone that taking hostages is cowardly and no way to fight a war, as he's cresting the hill in the Gundam with Saucier over his shoulder. Ensign Poe, still outside of the Wadom, wonders why the alarms didn't go off with Mustache Mobile Suit approaching. Below, the WADs are being activated, and Laurent announces again his intent to retrieve the hostage, and Ponytail says not to send the WADs out, but to assign them instead to camp defense, pointing out, very innocently, that the approaching savage is unarmed. I think Miche has set everyone's expectations entirely too low for Laurent's skill level, and it's amazing that this motherfucker doesn't recognize Laurent's voice. So Ponytail radios to Poe that she should reclaim the robot because it's unarmed, and Miche unsurprisingly breaks loose on her raw American spirit. The guy chasing Miche opens fire on her, but has the aim of a stormtrooper while she has the bullet-dodging skills of Lupin III, as if the show is promising us it has no intentions of hurting this character. Ensign Poe actually stops this man with the toe of the Wadom painfully to the face, stating that abusing prisoners is what savages would do. And, they did pretty much do that 10 minutes ago. So, yeah, good time to protect the look. Then she tries knocking Miche off balance with the mecha, but Miche just gets back up, openly disrespecting any mercy being shown to her. And Poe is pissed off at Mustache Pilot, saying Earthers shouldn't talk like they know everything. Loran realizes at that moment that they don't realize it's him, and like I guess he probably thought they would when he came in shouting that stuff, but like they don't, so he's just rolling with it. And then Sochie comes flying in with Miche's dad in the gunner seat. He's ineffectively firing on the enemy ships, and Miche is being captured in the finger grip of the Wadom all over again. Then Miche accuses Poe of cowardice for using a delicate flower such as herself as a human shield, and Poe responds, "Delicate? If you want to slip out of there, lose 10 kilograms, which is the burn of the fucking century, particularly from a woman that's twice her size." Ensign Poe demands that the pilot of the mecha exit, and Loran says that's the sort of thing you'd expect from pirates or bandits. And even though Poe is like looking at Loran, she doesn't seem to recognize him, I guess because of the headband. But then she also is like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like a woman. Because, I guess she had heard that it's supposed to be a woman. And then she demands that the militia forces behind them just fall back if they want the prisoner to be released. And Loran says that he thought the soldiers of Diana Counter were more honorable than this, and that Poe is disgracing the moon race, which just makes her angry. So then Misha tells her dad, give up on me, but he's like, hold on. And their flyby is distracting Poe just long enough for the Gundam to get in close. And Loran manages to, karate chop basically the hand off of the large robot, which contains Miche. And I gotta mention, there's stuff in here where the characters are having realizations and the whole screen changes color, or where the Gundam does its move and the screen changes color, that are very classic Gundam. This is stuff that was in the original show's first episode, and it's really cool visual tricks. I think they probably were trying to reserve this so that the show had more of its own identity, but I'm glad that they're still doing this stuff. So then the Turn A pulls the ultimate wide receiver run to catch Miche in the falling giant hand, which looks awesome. And Ponytail Guy radios to Ensign Poe to hold fire, while Poe's like, but the mobile suit needs to be destroyed. And he's like, look, you need to admit to the performance gap. We've been recording data on it here. If you follow, you're just going to embarrass yourself, which is the burn of the motherfucking century. Yeah, you thought that she had a great burn with telling that other girl to lose 10 pounds to get out of the hold? No. This man said, admit to the performance gap. Oof, just don't even go out there. You'll just die. And Poe's just taking it back. Loran collects Miche into Turn A Gundam's hand and ditches the hand of the Wadom. Sochie compliments that Loran can drive this thing perfectly now. Loran says he didn't feel like he was driving, implying some level perhaps of the Gundam's personal willpower, which is something that we'll keep, suggesting. After all, it did wake up on its own. Miche asks if he didn't think that she would be squished when he chopped off the hands, and he said he had assumed the fingers were locked into place. Miche's dad asks if they were able to do that, and Sochie is just being blown away, assuming that he must know it because it's also true of the Gundam. And then Gwyn receives a call confirming to him the situation that just happened, while Harry is standing across his desk from him. And he accosts that the militia had stole a civilian mobile rib and used the mustache mobile suit to threaten an encampment which existed solely to protect their civilians. Gwyn responds that his report was from a different squad, but it corroborates that story. Harry tells Gwyn that his communication seems efficient, and Gwyn just says that that's what they're accustomed to, seemingly missing Harry's point, enough so that Harry just doesn't even bother responding to him, because, indeed, his communication is inefficient. Gwyn excuses himself, but then Harry announces that he is not a pacifist, and Gwyn says, I want to continue our negotiations using his usual fearful, confident front, and Harry says that Captain Audi would probably say the same if he were still alive. And then he also asks why can't Gwyn forward the call that he's about to receive in another room to the phone that's in this one, and Gwyn says that the personal calls go to his line and his fiancée is on the other line, which is a big lie because he's actually talking to the militia, and he says that if the moon people took a hostage, it means that they're in the wrong. So, whatever, as long as he can keep being not the guy who caused all this. The other person agrees and says that since their preparations to counter are going smoothly, they should put on a show of force. why not? So then Gween asks if their men will be able to operate the ball-shaped mechanical dolls, and they say that the mustache is proving a valuable reference source. Gween says that he's glad to hear it and they should do this, but also that Diana Soriel is supposedly going to be landing at the Gnosis airfield. And I have to mention, the title of this episode is like Diana Arrives, and I had legit forgotten that that's what was going to happen by this point in the episode. So I think that's pretty sly. Like, to get this far in, like having guaranteed from the beginning this was happening and then done so little with it, that it got me curious all over again. Like, wait, how is she going to do that at the very last second? So then we see this pretty serious loadout of dangerous looking robots that are across the water, which I'm not even convinced those balls could deal with, but the militia's ready to give him an eye full of Laura's white doll, so we'll see. So we've got this wonderful, serene folk guitar music that comes in, underscoring the train coming along the mountainside, with Kihel riding along in a heavy sundress. And the ball robots come walking alongside the train, and she's like, oh, are those the ones that they excavated? And the other men on the train say, oh, those are Kapools, and they tell her that the militia mechanized force is finally being sent into action, which she is not happy to hear. Even more upsetting, one of the Kapools is being piloted by Sochie, and Kihel shouts at her to stop this instant and come down from there, and Sochie is like, I can't, I'm driving the thing, and the militiamen are like, hey, she's got spunk, and Kihel's just defeated, like, yeah, I guess so. So then in the background, Joseph's yelling at some guys to not put oil on the Tournay because they don't use the same kind of oil in the Dark History as they do now. Kihel spots Loran running up to a shack where he confronts Colonel Michael that this attack is crazy, and they just tell him to keep his voice down, while Kihel is being led off the cart in a truly awesome shot. Kihel is looking determinedly pissed off as the men shout about how the trucks they have are not going to be enough, and they need to send even more under orders from Gween himself, surprising Kihel. Sochie meets up with Kihel at the encampment, asking if the robots are not impressive, and Kihel questions if Miche is piloting one too, and she says you can't drive one of these unless you're an airplane pilot. Kihel says that she's taking Sochie home, but Sochie says she can't because they have a mission today. Kihel asks if she's not worried about their mother, and Sochie absurdly argues that Mom only needs to see you happy and healthy and she'll be fine. But Kihel doesn't know how to explain to her that their mom is already totally broken, in part because of the fact that Sochie is out doing this stuff. And Sochie claims that she is fighting to help her mother work through the grief, which is really just projection of her own feelings, and Kihel does not know how to respond to this. Meanwhile, in the planning room, the heads of the militia plan to take the enemy's leader, claiming that no matter how powerful their weapons are, the enemy won't dare to use them if they have Diana. Literally planning a kidnapping exactly like they had just criticized the enemy for doing with Miche, and this one's even more premeditated. They also point out that if they kill Queen Diana, they will definitely be wiped out by the enemy. Loran tries to tell them to wait till Lady Diana is in the city, but then the men notice that he's saying lady, and they're like, what's up with that? And he's like, oh, just whatever. There's just going to be senseless civilian casualties if we let her be in the city when we do this. And so they respond that there's not going to be any fighting. They're just going to capture Diana using the white doll, and also the white doll is going to act as Queen's bodyguard. And Loran just begrudgingly receives this instruction. So then elsewhere, Gween is riding with his assistant in a car not unlike the one that the Heim family had used, past a bunch of lined-up cars on the backdrop of the Sumo, a Wadom, and other mecha standing in the sunset. In front of all these cars and mechs, all the humans from each side of the conflict are lined up for like a Mexican standoff. Gween's like, oh, these robots are something. But once Laura shows up, things won't be so one-sided, because Laura's just that good. With the setting sun at his back, Tournay arrives on the scene, and Harry is instantly at attention with his Sumo, as is Poe in her Wadom. With the sun, not even a robot in his shades, Harry states it's brazen to have arrived without a weapon. The Soleil finally starts descending from the sky, and Loran is ecstatic, opening his cockpit to stand at attention and revealing an awesome new pilot suit while some deliciously milky Bjork core hums in the background. We're not going to get into whether or not Yoko Kanno literally plagiarized Björk in this video. Just, I don't care. I don't care. Yoko Kanno's the GOAT. Incredible shots of the Soleil landing in the field. We get this peak Sid Mead moment where the two robots are standing in front of the giant airship, and it just looks awesome. And I really find it hard to imagine that Harry does not know who Laurent is already at this point. Gwyn learns that Colonel Michael is in Bostonia Castle from his assistant, and he finishes a coffee that he gives to a bellhop, which that guy shouldn't be here. This is not a civilian situation. The Sumo is sure to pose in front of Turn A Gundam as a shuttle comes down from the Soleil, and Laurent is using his maximum magnification to hope and to just catch a glimpse of the Queen, and sure enough, Queen Diana is on her way in, and epic music starts playing as she finally emerges, introduces herself with just a flood of light behind her, and immediately addresses Gwyn Sard Reinford by full legal name. Gwyn is struck by her presence, and she says she's pleased to meet him, looking just simply godlike, and then she calls out to thank all the members of her advanced team for their work, and the episode ends. So yeah, this one was a ton of fun. It was the most straightforward, but in a way that was compelling and fun to talk about. It's full of great visual moments, just so many cool screen caps, really getting to use the setting to just have fun finally. You know, there's no more setting stuff up other than at the very end. There's like raw 15 minutes of just having fun with the ideas that we already put into place, and it is tremendously fun. It feels like the show clicks here. And obviously I'm hoping it's going to move into a new kind of more plot-driven direction with the next episode before we have another like big action spectacle like this, but this was a nice one. If you want to hear more from me, make sure to go down and use the Linktree link in the description. I don't want to have to do a big promo right now at the end of this video. I think you all know what it's about. You've been listening to each episode of this as they come out. If you become a member of the channel, you will get access to the episodes a week early. So if you're hearing this when it came out, it means that you are a channel member, and I thank you so much. If you're not a channel member, you could have heard this last week, and also there's already a new episode out for you to hear right now. Okay, I think you all understand how memberships work. Thanks again for listening. I've been Nova. Never forget, anime forever.